This question or discussion about the how versus the why leads us onto something very interesting. Well, that's pretty interesting in itself, I think, but it leads us on to something which, to me, is like it's almost like the physics of psychology. Generally, when we make theories in the field of psychology, they're all just bunches of constructs, ideas that we throw out there and string together in some kind of order. So it seems to explain stuff. But what I'm talking about here is more like a proper principle in physics. It's the thing about natural sciences, the principles that we are looking at here are deep. They're not arbitrary mental constructs, which is unfortunately all we usually seem to come up with in the social sciences. So what this principle is that the principle that there's two types of journey. The positive journey and the negative journey. The positive journey is, as I've said many times, is where we build upon the past and develop the past into the future without losing track of the past. So we're extending the past, really. In mathematics, it's a straight line. A straight line has this immediate aspect that it seems to be very dynamic and going somewhere. So a point, it just kind of sits there on the page, doesn't get up to much, pretty uninspiring. But a straight line shoots off to infinity. It just keeps on going. So that's pretty amazing. It's dynamic, not like a point. But that's the immediate impression. We are immediately impressed by the fantastic dynamism of the linear line. But actually, the straight line isn't as great or as fantastic as it kind of makes out it is, really. And the reason for that is that it never actually goes anywhere, despite apparently seeming to. It doesn't go anywhere because all a straight line is, mathematically, is an extrapolation of the original point, on and on and on and on. So what's infinite in a straight line is the extrapolation or the extension, the copying, as I was saying earlier. So we could get pretty impressed because the copying is infinite. Wow, this basic blueprint or this basic position is getting copied out forever. And that's type 1 change, that's linear change. That's the positive journey. So on the face of it, the positive journey is great. And we can all stand there and feel really stirred by it. But fascinatingly, what we're observing really is just the extension of the old, the repetition of the old. And even when we put it like this, or especially when we put it like this, the repetition of the old hardly sounds that exciting. If we're watching a TV program and every day they said, and here's a repetition of the old, guys, because the old is good, we'd soon get very fed up. So psychologically speaking, the repetition of the old, it's not that exciting, really. Not that exciting, but it contains security. In other words, there's no risk. Hey, well, I knew where I was with the old. I knew what the story was, so I'll just do it again. That's no risk. So looking at the positive journey from a psychological point of view, what we can say is that it consists of us working on a basis that we don't go into, we don't examine, but which we protect and promote and extend onwards and onwards. So the great thing is to extend or promote or to perpetuate the bunch of assumptions, a starting off position which we're not going to look at. And the very terrible thing is not to be able to do that, or to be at risk of not being able to do that. So, as I said in the last episode, it doesn't matter what we're protecting, it doesn't matter what our starting off position is. At least I think that's what I said. Because the important thing is to protect it, not what it is. And this isn't a strange thing, we see it every day with beliefs. A devout believer, you would imagine, really does care about what it is that they believe in. But actually this is very far from being the case. A devout believer cares about believing. If they could believe in something else which seemed equally firm or secure to them, they'd believe in that, because the net result is the same. You get to feel secure. It doesn't matter what the hell it is. A belief is a belief. It's just a way of shutting your mind down to the new. Because the new is the enemy, because the new is the risk. So, we're given an identity, say. We could say that society gives us an identity, which it does. But we could also say that the thinking mind gives us an identity. Because very quickly, a bunch of ideas coalesce about who we are and what life's about. These ideas originate in the people close to us, or pass them on to us, oral fashion, and originally they come from society. So the name of the game is to take this package and run, just like a relay race. Grab the thing and you run. You don't start worrying about what the thing is that you've grabbed. It's just a thing to grab. The point isn't to look into it. So here we have this situation where we are launching off in life very bravely. We're shooting ahead, and it's all on the basis of the I concept, or the self-construct, or this idea that we have of ourselves, the identity. And that's going to be our basis for everything. We're going to charge ahead. If all goes well for us, then we'll get to the end of the race and we will have successfully managed to keep extending the I concept, or we will have kept it going. And then we die. What happens in anxiety, just to give one example, and I've been using anxiety a lot, I know, but it's a very good way of understanding how the realm of purposefulness, this whole game that we're playing, can fail. Is that the task of perpetuating the I concept onwards and onwards becomes to look untenable. And the more we sense this, the more we struggle ahead, because it's our struggling ahead that helps us to ignore the fact that the bigger picture. So we just immerse ourselves in the struggling even more until all there is struggling. This is highlighted if you have a panic attack. In a panic attack, the very essence of it is struggling to defend some position, struggling to defend some idea of ourselves without knowing why we're doing it. without knowing what we're defending. There's just defending. But in the panic attack, the defending is, we know it's not working. It's kind of futile or failing defending. So we're just escalating the energy we're putting into defending it the whole time. And the more we escalate it, the more freaky the whole thing gets. Because as I was saying, the whole point about defending this identity, or the I concept, is that we do it without knowing we're doing it. Because if we knew we had to defend it artificially and prop it up and keep it going, like a political candidate or presidential candidate who is extremely dodgy and only can be kept afloat by lots of spin doctrine, which isn't an unusual situation, obviously. So it's the same for the I concept. It's a dodgy political candidate that needs the spin doctrine the whole time. But when we become aware of our massive investment in spin doctrine, which we do become aware of when the spin doctrine isn't working, then our attention is drawn to what we're actually doing. But as I was saying, when the pressure is on and we start to feel challenged in doing the thing and perpetuating what it is we're perpetuating, or defending what it is we're defending, we just try harder, we struggle on. We don't give it up as a bad job, we just struggle on harder to the bitter end, or we can't struggle anymore. And that's unconscious suffering. It's also, you could say, meaningless suffering, because what we're going through hell for isn't anything in particular. It's just an arbitrary position. It's just a bunch of ideas. It's not who we really are. We're going through hell because if we're able to look at what we're defending, we'd see that it's not worth defending and let go of it, but we can't because we've switched over into the compulsive realm, which is like the fear realm. Fear doesn't let you stop to examine what you're afraid of. Then it wouldn't be fear anymore. So then the negative journey is the interesting journey, because that isn't really interesting. It's a foregone conclusion whether we win or lose. We're just perpetuating the known as long as we can. Maybe we get away with it, maybe we don't. And the known isn't a real thing anyway. It's just that we like to kid ourselves that we know something because we feel better then. So the negative journey is interesting because, as Israel Regardie says, when the magician attains to the summit, that it's not the same guy that started off on the journey. He puts it neater than that. I can't remember exactly how he puts it. So that's kind of weird. So you get to where you want to go, but you're no longer there. It wasn't you that got there. So what kind of a journey is that? So in a positive journey, the journeyer stays the same the whole time, and the backdrop changes. You can imagine the backdrop going by and going by. It's all changing. We're getting somewhere. But we're not really getting anywhere because the traveller is exactly the same. He or she is unredeemed. After lots and lots of travelling, they're exactly the same. They haven't grown at all. Whereas in the negative journey, not only does the backdrop change, but so does the journeyer. So does the one who is experiencing the journey. So it's a bit like two sorts of evolution. One type of evolution where the rules never change, which isn't really evolution, it's just a game. And the other type of evolution where the rules themselves keep changing, which is much more interesting, of course. It corresponds to what James Cast calls the infinite game, where we're continually being surprised. So in unconscious suffering, we never want to be surprised. If we're successful in this, we won't call it suffering, but it still is. If we're unsuccessful, then we know that we're going to be surprised, and we're very, very afraid of that possibility, because we really, really have equated being surprised with the worst thing ever. And yet all there is surprise, so that's our predicament. So that's a finite game player who plays in order never to be surprised. Doesn't sound so inspirational when you put it like that. Even if we succeed as a finite game player, we've still shot ourselves in the foot. We've still failed. Even our success is a failure. Even our winning is losing. So with a negative journey, we really are moving into the unknown, because we haven't got a fixed basis to keep comparing things to. When we do have a fixed basis to keep comparing things to, that means everything that happens to us is always understood in the same way. And so that everything that happens to us always is the same thing, because we've interpreted the new in terms of the old. And that turns the new into the old. And our basis that we cling to is our way of making sense of, interpreting reality. And the reason we cling to that identity or self is because we really don't want to learn of any new ways of seeing things. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with new ways of seeing things. There's only something inherently wrong with new ways of seeing the world when we're super attached to the old way, as if that's who we really are, which is what happens in the identification process. We identify with a fixed point. So this way of looking at the two different types of change makes sense from a psychological point of view, and it also corresponds entirely with physics, because in physics we have linear change, where the original set of proportionalities is preserved no matter what, and we have non-linear change, which is unpredictable change, because the rules governing that change are themselves changing. Now in physics we can't really point at one type of change and say, oh, that's not very good, look at that, it's just linear change, how stupid. They're just the two types of change. But in psychology, we have to say something about the two types of change, or the two journeys. Because the difference between embarking on a negative journey and getting invested in the positive journey is so tremendous. The negative journey is how we experience life itself, whereas the positive journey is how we thwart that and don't experience life. We just experience our own holding on, and whether we're successful in that or not successful. And the fact that what we're holding on to isn't real doesn't really matter to us. In fact, it matters very much that we don't find that out. So the positive journey is a self-negating journey. It's where we absolutely thwart our own growth. And there's we have to say something about that, because it stands to reason that if I am absolutely thwarting my own growth, that's not great. It's not a great way to live. I wouldn't really want to do that if I could see that I was doing it. Who wants to thwart their own growth after all? And just as a final point on this whole question, it really helps to understand that the social world or society is the domain of the known. It's a game, a closed game, a finite game. And the whole point of a closed game is that it never goes beyond itself, it just repeats itself. And so what that means is the collective reality that we've created for ourselves, that we have agreed upon, has this function. It's like a massive collusion. It has this function of totally thwarting our growth, which is a pretty amazing thing to consider. And it's not something we can kind of go, okay. I mean, if you can actually see that, it really does revolutionize our way of seeing things. Okay, thanks for watching.